And welcome everybody to another episode of Fins Nation. I am your host Louis Sung, and I am joined today by a very special guest who is going to be joining us for this special edition of Fins Nation. We're going to go behind enemy lines, and we're going to be talking some San Diego I did it again, folks. San Diego Chargers, the Los Angeles Chargers. I've been doing so well up until this point. But yes, the Los Angeles Chargers are going to be having a rematch with the Miami Dolphins this upcoming Sunday. So we are very excited to actually have some Dolphins football to talk about. And I am joined by Arjun Menon, who is a football analyst who goes to the University of Michigan. He's also a big-time Chargers fan. So we're going to be able to get some inside info on what makes the Chargers tick. So how are you today, sir?
Doing very well. Excited to be able to watch football, real football, for the first time in what is it, like 7, 8 months. So can't get better. Really get better than Chiefs Lions, especially with Travis Kelce out. It'll be interesting to see what the Chiefs do. But just excited for NFL to be back and to be able to watch football every Sunday.
Yeah, for sure. And just like as a reminder for everybody, this show is being recorded the day before it comes out, so that's why we haven't actually seen what happens with the Chiefs and the Lions just yet. Just between everybody and else, I am personally going to be picking the Chiefs to win. I don't foresee the Lions beating them in Week 1, but maybe, who knows? Any given Sunday or Thursday or whatever other day.
Mhm.
So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about. We're going to try to squeeze as much of it as we can into this show. We're going to be talking about what happened last year versus the Chargers that the Dolphins went through. We're going to be talking about connections between Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley. We're going to be talking about what did the Chargers do this offseason and this preseason to get themselves prepared so that we can kind of have an idea of what we're getting ourselves into. We're going to try to get into it as much as we can. But before that, really quick, just want to go ahead and mention that this show is brought to you by our good friends over at PrizePicks.com. PrizePicks.com is the revolutionary fantasy platform where you can now pick up to 6 different players across professional sports leagues. Whether that's the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, one of each, it's up to you to decide. Just choose whether your chosen player will get more or less than their projected stat. They give you free squares, such as the Dak Prescott free square, which is still available for you to take advantage of. They also have special Taco Tuesday promos where they will go ahead and give you discounted props for you to take advantage of. All you have to do is go on there and see where the taco is lying, and you can be able to get a discount on that. And of course, the Flex Friday specials where you can get your money back if you lose or multiply the amount of money you can normally win. I'll be taking advantage of that again, trying to repeat my $500 win just a couple of weeks ago. With offers like that they give you, it's hard to justify not signing up if you're any kind of a fantasy sports fan. So use the promo code 5, that's FIVE, and they will match up to $100 on your initial deposit when you sign up. Get promo code 5, FIVE. Go to prizepicks.com, deposit $100, and let PrizePicks give you 100 of their dollars for you to play with and get started winning today. And we have a new sponsor for this show. It is actually Biscayne Bay Brewery. So if you're looking for somewhere where you can hang out and watch the Dolphins game or whatever other game you want to go ahead and watch, Biscayne Bay Brewery is the place for you. Located in downtown Miami, they are independent and locally owned, and they are the only official craft beer of Miami Marlins and the individual brewing partner of the Miami Heat. They have a whole bunch of stuff going on, and not only that, there is going to be a live Five Reasons Sports Miami Dolphins versus Los Angeles Chargers watch party, which if you are listening to this, everybody is invited to go there. And on Sunday, it starts at 3 p.m. Eastern. And if you mention Five Reasons when you arrive, you will be receiving a free beer. So Biscayne Bay Brewery, proud sponsor of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Make sure you join us for that watch party this upcoming Sunday. All right, so Arjun, there's a lot of stuff that we've been talking about over the past few days regarding the Los Angeles Chargers. I did a live show on Tuesday with some of my other co-hosts talking about what exactly we should expect from the Chargers, what happened against the Chargers, that the Dolphins basically got shellacked, for lack of a better term. They just could not keep up as far as their overall numbers. Somehow they only lost by 7 points, which is a miracle in and of itself. But either way, it was just not a good night for the Dolphins overall. And I was wondering, because you've probably looked back at that game, you've looked at it and you say, okay, what happened here? How did the Chargers actually stop an offense that was on such a roll like the Dolphins? I understand that they had faced the 49ers 1 week before and they kind of slowed them down, but the Chargers brought them to a screeching halt. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what exactly happened there.
Yeah, it's definitely something I wasn't expecting. I thought the Dolphins would come in and honestly beat the Chargers in that game, but ultimately came down to, I think, Brandon Staley putting together one of the best game plans he's had, and I do think in part he kind of copied a little bit of what the Niners did in the previous week, and ultimately what I was seeing was the Chargers did all they could at taking away the middle of the field. And forcing Tua to either beat them outside or take the check down. And those are two things that honestly, I didn't see much of him doing throughout that game. The Chargers would drop their linebackers 9, 10 yards down the field, honestly, to the line to gain. And Tua really, I think, kind of was flummoxed by that. And it was one of, I thought, his worst performances of the season. Didn't really see a lot of throws outside of the numbers. He wasn't really taking the checkdowns that were there. And there were times, I think, instead of taking the checkdown, he was scrambling. So ultimately, I think it just came down to a couple of things of the Chargers being able to stop the run on early downs, forcing the Dolphins into expected pass situations. And then on those expected pass situations, playing a lot of cover 2, cover 6, and dropping their linebackers into depth, which were taking away the middle of the field and a lot of those crossing routes that Tyreek and Waddle had a lot of success with last year. So I'm not really sure if that's going to be something that continues this game, and if Brandon Staley changes it up or if he trots out the exact same game plan. But whatever they did last year, it definitely worked, and I think it slowed down the Dolphins' offense quite a lot last year.
Well, part of the situation that we've been talking about as of late is that now the Miami Dolphins actually have the Chargers' former defensive coordinator on their staff as the passing game coordinator. That's Ronaldo Hill. So now I don't know from the outside looking in, what exactly the dynamic is in that Chargers locker room. I don't know how involved the defensive coordinator Ronaldo Hill was with the defensive game plan. Is this more of a Brandon Staley kind of does everything and Ronaldo Hill's job is to execute it? Or did Ronaldo Hill actually have some level of say in what actually happened every single week with the Chargers game plan on defense?
Yeah, I'm sure Ronaldo Hill definitely played a part in coming up with the game plan on game days. I'm not really too sure about that. Brandon Staley is the one who calls the defensive plays throughout the entire field. Like there are some teams that you'll have defensive coordinators call plays for first and second down, and then you'll have another coach call plays on third and fourth down, or they'll have a coach call plays outside of the red zone, and then you'll have a red zone defensive play caller, things like that. But for the most part, to my understanding, Brandon Staley calls plays throughout the entire game, no matter what the situation is. So I don't think losing Ronaldo Hill to the Dolphins is that big of a loss in terms of, kind of like information lost. It does seem like from what the Chargers have said, Derek Ansley, who's the newly promoted defensive coordinator, is kind of highly regarded throughout the league, which is why Brandon Staley gave him a promotion so that he would stick around instead of leaving elsewhere. But I definitely think Ronaldo Hill played a part in what was that defensive game plan last year, and maybe that lack of continuity could hurt them this year. But because Brandon Staley's calling the plays, I'm not seeing I don't think there's going to be that much of a drop off, or I don't think there'll be that much confusion on the field when it comes to game time, just because again he wasn't really calling the plays.
Right. And that's part of what we've always been discussing these past few days. Like, I personally felt like, well, Ronaldo Hill's going to give some level of a data dump. If nothing else, he will at least be able to tell the Dolphins what Brandon Staley's tendencies are. It's what he
Mhm.
likes to call in specific moments. So if nothing else, it doesn't matter how creative you are, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you will have a tendency to do X, Y, and Z in X, Y, and Z scenario. The same goes for Mike McDaniel on the Dolphins. He's more likely to call this than he is to call this in this given scenario. And all it really is just deciding, well, when is he going to go by his habit, or when is he going to break his own rules, for a lack of a better term. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the connection that Brandon Staley has with Vic Fangio. So Vic Fangio, back when he was part with the Chicago Bears, he did bring Brandon Staley in to be part of his staff, and then brought Brandon Staley in with him when he became the head coach of the Denver Broncos. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that whole connection. Would you consider Brandon Staley kind of a Vic Fangio protege, or does he kind of split off and become his own thing, for lack of a better term?
I definitely think he is a protege. I'm not sure if he's definitely not been able to run Fangio's defense as well. In well with the Chargers, obviously he had the number one defense in the league with the Rams, and that Rams defense and the 2018 Bears are very comparable in terms of how they ranked on defense against the pass, against the run. But just with the Chargers, he hasn't been able to execute his scheme for the most part. His first year, he was playing with Gus Bradley's defensive players, and those players were 4-3 players trying to fit into a 3-4 scheme. And then last year there were just a ton of injuries, Bosa missing most of the season, JC Jackson being out the entire season, losing two of his defensive tackles to season-ending injuries. But he just hasn't been able to really execute. The defense has been really bottom 5, bottom 10 for the past 2 years. Haven't been able to stop the run, and honestly, that's not something I see changing really this year, especially at stopping the run. They didn't. The only upgrade or move they made to address the run defense was signing Eric Kendricks and letting Drew Tranquil walk in free agency. But if you ask me, I think Drew Tranquil is the better linebacker at this point in both players' careers. Tranquil might be a little bit lighter. He might be worse at stopping the run. But in this day and age, this is a passing league. At the end of the day, I think you'd want to prioritize pass defense over run defense. But I think just because of how bad Brandon Staley's run defense has been in the past 2 years, he wanted to get that linebacker in Eric Kendricks, who's been who's a little bit heavier, who's a little more adept at stopping the run, but who's worse at stopping the pass. So it'll be interesting to see if that trade off was worth it. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think Brandon Staley's core philosophy does stem from Vic Fangio's in terms of light boxes, too high pre-snap, and then playing a lot of quarters in cover six, which the Chargers were near the top of the league at in terms of cover six. I don't think they ran too much quarters last year, but yeah, at least from a too high shell perspective, Brandon Staley does try to emulate Vic Fangio from that side.
So, yeah, and that's what I feel like is that the Dolphins, in many ways, when they played against the Chargers last season, a lot of the wounds were self-inflicted. Just by your own way of putting it, the Chargers were not particularly good at stopping the run. So it just kind of felt like Mike McDaniel was feeding right into Brandon Staley's game plan by just constantly asking Tua to throw the football down the middle of the field, just keep keeping on, keep the pressure on, even though it wasn't actually working. If he had given the ball to Raheem Mostert a couple more times, if he had handed the ball off to Jeff Wilson instead of just kind of forcing it into a spot that just wasn't open most of the time, I feel like the Dolphins would have been in a much better spot. But with that being said, the Dolphins do seem to have, at least verbally, a renewed sense of desire to run the football. So we'll see if there's a more balanced game plan. Now, you said they haven't done a whole lot to actually improve the run defense, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what do you think that the Chargers were aiming to accomplish this offseason? Because obviously they didn't just go into the season saying, you know what, we're good with what we got, let's just go ahead and stand pat. So what do you think they were trying to focus on this season?
Getting healthy. Honestly, they didn't make any big moves in the offseason. They entered free agency with negative cap space. They restructured a bunch of players like Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and they basically said we're going to run it back. And they thought the moves they made last year were sufficient enough, and they just were too injured going into the postseason. I'm they obviously, when you enter free agency with negative cap space, you're kind of constrained in terms of the moves you can make. But just signing Eric Kendricks to me doesn't really move the needle in terms of improving the run defense. It could, he might be the missing piece, but to me, I guess just hoping that injury health is, or players coming back from injury is going to change the defense. It's not really a viable strategy. One data point that I kind of looked up this week was the Chargers were historically bad at stopping outside runs last year, so runs like outside of the tackles, and that was the type of run that the Dolphins had the most success with last year, running outside of the tackle. So it's kind of a strength for the Dolphins, weakness for the Chargers coming together. Part of it, you could say maybe Joey Bosa was out, so now you have Kyle Van Noy and Chris Rump playing extended snaps, especially on rundowns. But even when Bosa was on the field, I looked at the numbers. The numbers were just as bad, or just a little bit better, but it was still pretty bad. So even though they kind of tried to address the run defense by signing Eric Hendricks and drafting someone like Tui Pelotu high in the draft, it's still, in my opinion, not good enough. And the pieces they had last year just didn't cut it, and I don't really see them improving as much this year.
So now, where the Chargers obviously are trying to make their mark, for lack of a better term, you said that obviously Brandon Staley is a defensive-minded coach for the most part. He's the guy who's going to try to run the defense and keep everything going. But with the addition of Justin Herbert, with Austin Eckler being out there, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and those guys, there's a distinct microscope on the whole offense thing. Now, if we're going to compare quarterbacks, it's obvious that when it comes to numbers and whatnot, Justin Herbert is the guy that everybody's going to look at and say that's who the Dolphins should have picked in the long run. I am not personally one of those believers. I think that Tua Tagovailoa brings a lot to the table, and I feel like now that he's been given the tools that he needs to succeed, that he's going to be able to do some amazing things, provided that he stays healthy. That's always the proviso. But with the Justin Herbert situation, if you look back, even during his college time, right, there was always this one thing that there was always eluding him. and it was his ability to perform in clutch moments. I don't know if necessarily you agree, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a funny story just to give you some kind of an understanding of why I feel this way. There was a prop that Alfredo Arteaga, who is our 3 yards per carry, he's basically the head of the Five Reasons Sports Dolphins network part, but basically, there was this one bet that was always available, and it was whether or not Justin Herbert was going to throw a fourth quarter interception. And he bet on that like 3-4 games in a row. And every single time he won on it, to the point where they stopped putting the prop up because it's like too many people are making money on this one bet. So I don't know if maybe you feel like that's probably the Achilles heel for Justin Herbert or not, or if that's maybe if the Dolphins can just keep it close. If you figure that Tua might be able to bring the Dolphins up, because that seems to be where he actually is the best, is when it's in the fourth quarter, whereas Justin Herbert seems to struggle in that area.
Well, yeah, like I think there was a stretch where Herbert was throwing some fourth quarter interceptions. I'm not going to say that's honestly it's a good bet, because you can bet Justin Herbert to throw an interception at any point in the game, before the game starts, right? And I mean, like, I know that whole fourth quarter interception thing that, it was kind of brought up, and I understand, why people say that. I mean, Justin Herbert's interception rate last year was 2.84%. That's the lowest in the entire league for any quarterback. So honestly, to me, I think betting a Justin Herbert interception over doesn't really seem like a smart bet for me, just because he doesn't really turn the ball over. He had, yeah, I think he had the second lowest turnover worthy play rate in the NFL according to PFF. So I personally don't see a lot of value in that bet. And yeah, I think there were a couple of games where he did throw a fourth quarter interception, but to each their own. I'm not going to tell anyone what they should and shouldn't bet. And if they think, if people think that he's not good in the clutch, then by all means, go feel free to bet that fourth quarter interception. But I think based on the numbers alone, I wouldn't characterize him as someone who really turns the ball over a lot. And I think that kind of shows up in the numbers.
So now I want to ask you this, because since you're bringing up analytics and stuff like that, there have been a lot of people who I feel like are misconstruing who Tua Tagovailoa is, saying that it was just a year ago, before the 2022 season, they were accusing Tua of being a weak-armed dink and dunk quarterback who can never throw the ball past the 10-yard line in order to be able to get the ball moving. Obviously, after last season, I would hope that narrative is long dead, but there are still some people who feel that way, I guess. Whereas with Justin Herbert, we already know his arm is probably one of the strongest in the entire league. And yet it felt like in last year's offense, Justin Herbert was actually throwing more dink and dunks than Tua even dreamed of last season. So I don't know if you would say that that's an accurate assessment or not.
No, I mean, it's definitely an accurate assessment. Like, I mean, Austin Eckler led the league and led the team in receptions. I think he had over 100 receptions for the season, which you never want your running back to catch 100 passes. And yeah, I think Justin Herbert had like the second highest check down rate in the league. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that I'm disputing that. In fact, I think one of Tua's worst attributes last year was him not taking the check down enough, because once defenses started to adjust to Tyreek and Waddle running those downfield routes, those deep crossers, he had Mostert underneath. He had Jeff Wilson or whoever is playing running back or tight end, or even like Alec Ingold in those flat routes. And sometimes it is about taking those 5 or 6 yards rather than trying to get the 15 to 16. But at least with Justin Herbert, I think I kind of attributed the checkdowns to a couple of things. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen missed time, both separately and together. The offensive line was kind of in a flux at times at points in the year. I mean, when the Chargers played the Dolphins, the Chargers were missing both Rashawn Slater and their right tackle Trey Pipkins, and at times, the offensive line was missing 3 to 4 starters in a certain week. So and the Chargers allowed the highest percentage of quick pressure of any team in the league. Justin Herbert was the most pressured quarterback in the league in the regular season. So when you get under pressure, sometimes the best thing to do is to take the check down. So I don't necessarily fault Justin Herbert for taking the check down as often, just because of how much pressure he was under and all of the injuries that his weapons were under. But I think this year with Kellen Moore, I think that should change, and they have been prioritizing more of a downfield attack in training camp, from what I've read and seen.
Now, since you're talking about that, one of the things that we had noticed, and I don't know if maybe we just misconstrued it or maybe it's inaccurate, but it seems like that if we go back and watch the Chargers preseason, the starters didn't actually play any snaps in the preseason, like at all. Do you agree that do you think that that was a good idea, or do you wish that that the Chargers had actually like thrown Justin Herbert and the guys out there for like at least a series or two just to shake off some rust? Because in my opinion, the Dolphins sent Tua and them out there a little bit just to kind of shake the rust off, make sure that they kind of got a feel for the bullets being live. But this is a brand new offense the Chargers are going to be employing with Kellen Moore, and they just decided that they don't want to do any preseason. Do you think that was a good idea?
Yeah, I'm fine with it, honestly. Like I think the injury risk kind of outweighs the reward of playing a series. Honestly, like if you look at the Chargers roster, their entire starting offense are players they returned from last year. There's not I don't Quentin Johnson at this point is wide receiver 4. I don't think he did enough to beat out Josh Palmer in camp. So you're really returning your entire starting offense from last year minus Jamari Sawyer starting instead of Matt Filer. So I think the chemistry has been there. It's been brewing for 3 years, 2 years with the same group. I think they've gone through this type of offensive shift in philosophy before, like when they went from Anthony or Shane Steichen to Joe Lombardi. The offense started out extremely hot in 2021. I mean, they were 5-1 heading into, or 4-1, 5-1 heading into Baltimore when they eventually collapsed. But they've had hot starts before despite not practice or playing in the preseason. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. And honestly, I'm happy that Brandon Staley kind of employed that Sean McVay strategy and didn't suffer any injuries.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and get ready to wrap it up soon, but I just wanted to ask you real quick. Obviously, we can't go away without actually getting some picks in. So I'm going to go ahead and let you go first, Arjun. Just what's your thoughts on what's going to happen in this game, what your picks is, what your score is. So let's get the summary as you see it.
Yeah, I think at this point we kind of know who is and who isn't playing, but I think the Toronto Armstead injury is huge. There's no way to put it. Kendall Lamb is the backup, right?
Kendall Lamb is the backup. I will say that he's doing a lot better than I expected him to, quite frankly.
Mm,
But mind you, my basis was not incredibly high. Like I had already seen him play a few snaps against the Patriots last season, but he was
yeah.
good even in those snaps before he got hurt. But he's been doing pretty darn good, and he's been baiting all the practice snaps basically. Because the thing with Teron Armstead is, I am still not convinced that he's not going to play. Teron Armstead just doesn't practice.
Hmm.
Like he just does not practice. He has this kind of unwritten I don't practice rule because he's freaking Teron Armstead. He can afford it. So I don't know if he's going to play or not. I'm still holding out hope that he does. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play, but at the same time, it was like it also wouldn't surprise me if he did play. So
Hmm.
it's kind of an either or with Teron Armstead right now.
Yeah. So I think in either situation, honestly, I do see the Chargers coming away with this win. I think just because we've seen, I don't know, the last time we saw Tua, he was kind of on a streak of a couple bad games, and I think Brandon Staley's done well against Tua in the 2 games he's coordinated against him, and we did see kind of maybe a blueprint to stopping this Dolphins offense in general of dropping your linebackers back and playing a lot of too high. So I have the Chargers winning, final score 30-27. I think it'll be a close game, a lot of lead changes, but ultimately, I think the Dolphins are a little bit beat up with Jalen Ramsey on defense, and I think I've only heard good things about Kellen Moore's new offense and Justin Herbert thriving in that offense, and I think the offensive line is much more improved than it was last year. So I think the Chargers offense will roll. I'm not really confident at all about the defense, and I think Mike McDaniel will have a good counterpunch. But at the end of the day, I think traveling cross country and just the Chargers offense being better, in my opinion, at least for this game, I think the Chargers will come away with the win.
All right. So now my thought process is, and I'm going to stick with this, and we'll see which one of us is right at the end of the day. But I thought that the Dolphins would win this game, and if I'm not mistaken, I think I gave it back on Pulse of Fins Nation. I gave it a score of about 33-27 in favor of Miami, and the reason I did that was because of many of the reasons that I actually thought of. Is that I personally think that if it's a brand new offense that they're trying to employ, I think there is a difference between when you're doing it in practice and when the bullets are live. That's something that you can't necessarily replicate in training camp. I feel like that maybe it might take a series or two for them to like shake off the rust and say, okay, let's get to work. And by that time, the Dolphins could potentially put some points up. The other thing that I wanted to bring up was that I personally feel like, yes, the Chargers absolutely did stop Tua, and Tua did not adapt, and neither did Mike McDaniel. But unlike last season, which is when they were practicing against Josh Boyer, and I know there are people out there, who respects Josh Boyer as a coach, and I am sure that the man is a smart individual. But whatever his game plan was on a regular basis, it was just blitzing all the time just wasn't cutting it. And I don't know why they kept doing it over and over again. It felt like the only time they were actually getting anywhere was when they did not blitz, but that's not for me to decide. I'm not a coach. Josh Boyer is. But now that Vic Fangio is the defensive coordinator for the Dolphins, the fact that, again, Brandon Staley is a Vic Fangio protege. He learned from Vic Fangio, and now we have the man himself running our defense. And so if there is anybody out there who could teach Tua, here's how you beat this defense, kid. So whenever you see it, you know what to expect because you've been practicing against it all season. So what I'm thinking is that Tua's had enough time to adapt, to learn, to understand that, hey, you're about to face this kind of a defense. I taught Brandon Staley everything not everything he knows, but you know what I mean. So I'm looking at this and saying, okay, Tua's going to be more prepared this time because he's playing a defense that he's already been accustomed to seeing for the past few months. He's going to be able to understand that he's going to have to do some check down sometime, and I think he's starting to learn that. The Dolphins are running the football more, and at least verbally, I don't know for sure if they're going to do it. I hope that he does, but they say they want to run the football more. And I think with all of those reasons combined, I feel like that along with the improved defense, because obviously Vic Fangio is a better defensive coordinator than Josh Boyer. Sorry, Josh Boyer stance. He just is. I feel like with all of those factors involved, I think that the Dolphins will ultimately come out on top in this game. But that's it's not surprising that we see things differently. Well, I'm a Dolphins fan. You're a Chargers fan. It's not hard. Obviously, we see things from a certain lens.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason the spread is like 2.5, 3. It's going to be a close game, high total. It's just going to be a lot of back and forth. Like I'm not confident in my prediction. I just it's if I had to pick a side, I think the Chargers get it done. But I could easily see the Dolphins winning. And I know last year I was super confident that the Dolphins would go into SoFi Stadium and beat the Chargers, but that didn't happen. So it's just a prediction at the end of the day, and we'll learn. I think we'll learn a lot about both teams after this game.
Yeah. Any given Sunday, right?
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, Arjun, for joining me. I really do appreciate it. Tell the folks where they can find you so they can follow you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Arjun Menon 100. Really just there to, post football graphs, tables, send out some takes, post analysis every once in a while. But, really want to thank Luis for bringing me on. This is great.
All right. I appreciate you coming on. And for those of you who haven't already done so, again, make sure you go check out prizepicks.com. Use that promo code 5, that's FIVE, and they will match up to $100 on your initial deposit when you sign up. Arjun mentioned that the spread is about 2 to 2.5. So if you're going to make some bets, maybe just be bet on some individual players. So again, use the promo code 5, FIVE. Go to prizepicks.com and deposit your $100 so they can give you their $100. And then, of course, once again, Biscayne Bay Brewing. They are available in downtown Miami. They are locally owned and independent. There is a watch party that is going to be taking place in that downtown Miami area. So make sure you join in. Mention 5 Reasons. You get a free beer on us. Party starts at 3 o'clock, and we will be there to watch the game with you guys. That's going to be it for this show. Thank you all so much for listening. And brief announcement for everybody. Going forward, Fins Nation will only be playing on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Need to take a little bit of time off to take care of some priorities, but that's going to be the new schedule moving forward. So for those of you who are looking for more Dolphins content, don't worry. There is still going to be Pulse of Fins Nation on Tuesday nights at 7:30 p.m., and there is definitely going to be more Dolphin stuff available on Fridays. You're definitely going to have Alfredo Artiaga and Hussam Patel, the Scout and Combine, doing a whole bunch of stuff for the network there. You're still going to have the Extra Yard with Alex Dono and former Miami Dolphins running back Troy Stradford. You're going to have plenty of stuff to go with there. There is Dolphins content for you to enjoy. Make sure you tune in for all that. We will see you all next week for another episode of Fins Nation.